Hi, this is Christine of Fresh Oil Releases, and this message is called He Changes the Times and the Seasons. In my last post, I mentioned that Adar is the 12th month of the Hebrew calendar, being the month when the final loose ends of the previous season are being tied up neatly and all the last-minute preparations of the big new season being put in place. So let's now look in detail at the specific things that occurred in the first week of this important month in the Bible. From the 1st to the 3rd of Adar was the 9th plague of darkness in Egypt. The 5th of Adar was Moses' last day of leadership. On the 6th of Adar, Moses completed the writing of the Torah and he put the scroll into the ark. He transferred leadership to Joshua, released the Song of Moses over the people and his personal blessing on them as he said goodbye to them. And on the 7th of Adar, Moses died on his 120th birthday on Mount Nebo, and God buried him. So that's quite a week full of things happening. So we can see that this particular week of the Hebrew calendar is extremely pivotal. It is the week of visible separation of the people of darkness from the people of light. The God of light demonstrates clearly who are his. It is the beginning of a new season when Moses will never see the face of Pharaoh again. It is the week in which the recording of all God has spoken in the preparation season is completed, and this is archived in the ark. In other words, God's word spoken to Moses in the tent of meeting is returned to him in written form to testify against an apostate people in later years. The transference of leadership also takes place in this week under God's instruction. There is impartation and inauguration of a new leader for a new chapter. And God sings over his people through Moses. Sound is released this week over the remnant. This week is the closing of an old chapter, and old leadership is permanently removed by the end of the week. One could write a separate blog post on each of these points, but I'm going to discuss briefly what the main themes of this first week of Adar are. It's important you pray through them with the Holy Spirit so he can give you specific application for your life and your circumstances now in the season that we stand in. The first theme is separation and cessation, or ceasing. Today, or the day I wrote the blog, the 13th of February, yesterday, was the 1st of Adar, the anniversary of the beginning of the 3 days of darkness. It is a pivotal day because it was the day when God demonstrated so clearly who belonged to him that no confusion remained. Previously, the Egyptians and the Israelites were all mingled in together in Egypt, and unless you knew people specifically, well, you didn't know who was who. But on that day, those who were not God's experienced dense darkness, a darkness that could be felt. But those who know him and are called by his name will find their houses filled with light, despite the state of affairs outside their door. The Hebrew word for darkness also means misery, destruction, death, ignorance, sorrow, and wickedness. Dense wickedness, dense sorrow, dense misery, and dense destruction. And this is all a darkness that can be felt. This is the portion of those who are not his in the days ahead. And when this 9th plague hit, there was no opportunity for an Egyptian to quickly run into a house filled with light. When the plague hit, the dividing line had already been drawn between the different people, and it was on the basis of DNA. Those with Egyptian DNA experienced dense darkness for a prophetic 3 days. This is a strong warning to those sectors of the so-called church who have modeled themselves after the world. Ishmael had the right father but the wrong mother. Hagar was an Egyptian, and Ishmael and his mother were cast out. Only the true spiritual seed of Abraham through the womb of Sarah will find themselves bathed in light in this season. I want to just read a portion from the blog post, The Remnant Empowered and Enlightened. In Egypt, during the 3 days of darkness, the Israelites had light in their houses. It was a supernatural light. And in the same way, remnant, supernatural light will fill your life and your heart, even while dense darkness envelops the world in this night of trial. There is work to do for the kingdom. There are greater heights of holiness to climb. Press on higher, remnant of God. Become more holy, more set apart unto him. The 3 days of darkness was the 9th plague, the second last contraction, pushing the people of God out of the confines of slavery in the womb of Egypt and the world system, and pushing them into the wilderness, where all provision and protection promised in a marriage covenant with God came into play. The commencement of the 9th plague marked a cut-off point. There is a time when God stops giving the enemy any more grace to let his people go of his own accord. In Egypt, this moment came on the 4th of Adar, after the 3 days of darkness. That was the cut-off point. No more negotiation with the powers of darkness or their human representatives. No more face-to-face time with the slave masters. From this moment on, God was going to roll out a plan that gave him all the glory, delivered his people from slavery to Egypt, and ultimately destroyed the whole enemy army. But that would only fully manifest itself 7 weeks later, on the 21st of Aviv, when they crossed the Red Sea, which was a week after the destroyer carried out the first portion of his righteous judgments in Egypt during the 10th plague. Exodus 10 verse 28 says, "And Pharaoh said to Moses, Get away from me, see that you never enter my presence again, for the day you see my face again, you will die. And Moses said, You have spoken truly, I will never see your face again." The second theme of this week, the first week of Adar, is the archiving of all God's spoken instruction. Everything God has spoken to you in the way of training and instruction in these days has been recorded and is being archived in heaven at this time. God does not waste words. He spoke them, you heard them, and they will testify for or against you on your final day. They are the blueprint, the plumb line you are to align your life to. The instructions heard in this week carry power to bring forth full manifestation if you will walk them out. I have spoken in recent blog posts of personal pollination. Bear in mind that pollination does not necessarily mean fully formed fruit. Water soaking in the light of the sun, that's the SON, nutrients absorbed from the soil where you are rooted and planted, all play a pivotal role in bringing that pollination to full fruition. And the DNA of the spoken words of God is exceedingly precious. It was imparted by the mouth of the Creator of everything to you personally. Nurture and guard the divine portion that has been assigned to you. Be faithful and do not let it be stolen from you. Bring it forth fully formed in its appointed season. The third theme is the transference of authority. 40 years after the people of God left Egypt, the wilderness sifting and refining was done. The preparation for the promised land is over, and a new chapter requires new leadership. What made God choose Joshua? I believe it is more than the fact that he gave a good report of the promised land when the 12 forerunners went to check it out. The leaders that will be endued with authority and commissioned to lead God's remnant into the promised land will all have one thing in common. They have remained for many hours soaking in the presence of God. Exodus 33 from verse 7. Now Moses used to take his own tent and pitch it outside the camp, far off from the camp, and he called it the tent of meeting. And everyone who sought the Lord went out to that tent of meeting which was outside the camp. When Moses entered the tent, the pillar of cloud would descend and stand at the door of the tent, and the Lord would talk with Moses. And the Lord spoke to Moses face to face, as a man speaks to his friend. Moses returned to the camp, but his minister Joshua, son of Nun, a young man, did not depart from the tent. This is the difference between the Moses generation of leadership and the Joshua generation of leaders. Both Moses and Joshua had ascended higher up Mount Sinai when the Israelites first came out of Egypt. Remember, the 70 elders and Moses and Joshua went up and they ate in the presence of God and lived, but then God called Moses and Joshua up higher. In that place of face to face with God, Joshua must have developed an insatiable hunger for God's presence. Because later, as the wilderness years rolled by, there was a distinct difference evident between Moses and Joshua. Moses went into the tent of meeting, got the necessary instruction, and went out and delivered it to the people. He was on active duty. Meanwhile, his understudy remained in that tent of meeting, hour after hour, in the presence of God. There is no record of what God said to Joshua in those times. Nothing has been written down, but his heart soaked it all in. Moses longed to see the promised land and experience the fullness of inheritance, but he disqualified himself through disobedience. It may seem a small error to others, but our whole lives carry a message, and when we do not fulfill God's instruction to the letter, we rob ourselves of the fullness of manifestation. Yes, the old leadership will see the land of promise with the eye of faith, but they will never walk its length or dwell there. It is sad, but it is true. Their part in God's plan comes to an end in this month of Adar. The place where the remnant is going in this next season requires leadership by those saturated in God's presence. It requires impartation on a level and depth not sought by the previous chapter's leaders. Yes, Moses laid his hands on Joshua when transferring leadership. You see that in Deuteronomy 34 verse 9. But Joshua had his own history with God. He had soaked in the manifest presence of God year after year himself, long before any public mantle of authority was transferred to him. Such is the caliber of those who will be inaugurated into places of authority in the Spirit in this hour. They are the carriers of the double portion. And they need that much anointing because they are leading into giant territory. They need the manifest presence of God in their bones, not just a surface level of mantle. A number of times God said to Joshua, "Be very courageous." There was a reason for that. He was headed into territory which would scare the living daylights out of anybody walking in their own strength and leaning on their own understanding. Are you listening to me, remnant of God? This is where we're headed. God knew that, and not only did he impart a superior level of spiritual wisdom to Joshua, but he also sent his angelic army to do the heavy work at their first battle in the Promised Land. The people of God used a supernatural strategy and wisdom which confounded the leaders of Jericho. The people of God released a sound. And as the armies of heaven and the army of God on earth each played their designated part in God's battle plan, those walls were flattened. God is going to be pulling out battle plans kept secret and hidden from the eye of the enemy, held back for this very hour in which we're entering. They are going to decimate the enemy camp, and we will take the land by walking in the profound, unsearchable wisdom of God, which is so much higher than man's wisdom. It is God's right hand and the incredible power of his supernatural favor that will transfer the ownership of the land of promise to his remnant. Psalm 44 verse 2 says, "You drove out the nations with your hand, and it was your power that gave them a home by rooting out the heathen. But Israel you spread out. For they got not the land in possession by their own sword, neither did their own arm save them, but your right hand and your arm and the light of your countenance did it, because you were favorable toward them and did delight in them. Isn't that amazing? The fourth theme of this first week of Adar is a double portion sound release. On the 6th of Adar, after commissioning Joshua, Moses wrote down the words of a song that God dictated to him. Then he taught it to the Israelites. And God says something very significant at the beginning of this song. In Deuteronomy 32 verse 2 he says, "My message shall drop as the rain, my speech shall distill as the dew, as the light rain upon the tender grass, and as the showers upon the herb." Remember how I shared that Adar is the month of the latter rain, which brings the grain to full maturity. In these words spoken during the first week of Adar, we find out what the latter rain consists of. God's spoken message. The sound of his words whispered gently in your spirit like rain falling on good soil. Then he says his message is like the showers falling upon herbs. The Hebrew word for herb also means sparkling light or illumination. In other words, the herbs represent the revelation you already have planted in the soil of your heart. God is going to water those revelations and add to them. He is going to add the light and the water of his word to them so that you start seeing much more clearly what he meant by those revelations. He is going to expand and grow the revelation you are already nurturing in your heart. The water of the words he releases over you in these days will bring those revelations to maturity and to fullness of understanding, and they will so nourish you and impart life to your spirit that you will be found ready for harvest and marked as part of the barley first fruits offering at Aviv. The Hebrew word for latter rain also means eloquence. The word for early rain means teaching, the ABCs. Eloquence would be poetry, words flowing off the tongue, not just learning the letters of the alphabet and learning the first readers. It is the early rain that compacts the soil and forms a firm foundation for the seed to take root downward and begin to grow upward. But the harvest will come to ruin if it receives no latter rain. Zechariah 10 verse 1 says, "Ask of the Lord rain in the time of latter rain. It is the Lord who makes lightnings which usher in the rain and gives men showers and grass to everyone in the field." Beloved, ask for rain in this time when the latter rain is being freely released. There is a portion of latter rain for you. Soak it all in, every word that he speaks to your heart. I have mentioned before that the test of the Aviv barley is passing the grain through the fire. Aviv barley, or mature barley grains, are not damaged by fire, but rather hardened and transformed into a state in which the nutrition they carry within them is accessible to others. Barley grains which are not mature enough just vaporize and disappear when passed through the fire. Considering that we are expecting a baptism of fire, it's vital we experience this in a state of full maturity and readiness. How we need that latter rain. And actually it seems it is the baptism of fire that weeds out and removes those who are not ready to carry it in the season ahead. If you are not mature of spirit, when the baptism of fire is poured out, it will destroy you. There is a required standard of holiness and purity which is the prerequisite for being able to dwell with the baptism of fire dwelling within. Isaiah 33 verse 14 says, "The sinners in Zion are afraid, trembling seizes the godless ones. They say, who among us can dwell with that devouring fire? Who among us can dwell with those everlasting burnings? He who walks righteously and speaks uprightly, who despises gain from fraud and from oppression, who shakes his hand free from the taking of bribes, who stops his ears from the hearing of bloodshed, and shuts his eyes to avoid looking on evil. Such a man will dwell in the heights. His place of defense will be the fortresses of rocks. His bread will be given him. Water for him will be sure. Not only did God sing over his people through Moses, but Moses also released a second sound, a prophetic blessing on the tribes as he bid them goodbye. There is a prophetic blessing released by the old leadership over the remnant that is going to cross over and possess the land of promise. It is the second portion of sound impartation released over the people that day. The 6th of Adar is a double portion day. That prophetic blessing is a creative word, a word calling forth that which is not yet to become manifest in the future. It is the seed of a word sown into hearts that will only bring forth fruit in a future season. The death of the old and a season of mourning is the 5th theme of this first week of Adar. God completely removes the old leadership before the days of crossing over. They will not live to criticize the new leadership from the wings or offer advice on how to tackle the next giant. It is time for them to enter into their rest after a long period of faithful servanthood. And that death knell signals the loss of all that is familiar, all that has been. The normal they have known in the preparation years will never be again. Everything is about to change dramatically, and the removal of old leadership 6 weeks before crossing into the promised land is only the beginning of the changes they will experience. And as is fitting when a great leader is taken home, a period of 30 days of mourning begins at the end of the first week of Adar. It ends 3 days before they crossed over the Jordan on the 10th of Aviv. These 30 days are a time of reflection, of letting go of what has been before, of turning one's back on the familiarity of day-to-day life, of the very long preparation season. And it is the setting of one's face like a flint towards the unknown chapter that lies ahead. One has heard about the promised land, but one's eyes are yet to see it. One's feet have never trodden its soil. But these 30 days of mourning are a time of coming to terms with the fact that there is no going back. Nothing will ever be the same again. There is absolutely no point in longing for life to return to what you call normal. You have come to a juncture that signals the end of all that has been and the transition into something new. Say your goodbyes. But it is no use holding fondly on to the mental snapshots of the days of manna and quails. Once we have crossed over, that form of provision will cease, and the garlic and leeks of Egypt have never been tasted by this remnant army that weeps now in the desert side of the Jordan. These ones have only ever tasted supernatural provision. They have no idea what the food of the world tastes like. They have no craving for it. Their appetites are not spoiled by the delicacies of Egypt. They know what angels' food tastes like, and it is on this diet that they have grown to maturity and are ready for the battles that lie ahead to possess their inheritance. Deuteronomy 34 verse 7 says, Moses was 120-year-old when he died. His eye was not dim, nor his natural force abated. And the Israelites wept for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days. Then the days of weeping and mourning for Moses were ended. Weeping endures for a night, but joy comes in the morning. And in the presence of the Lord there is fullness of joy. The season on the other side of the Jordan is a season of joy in the presence of the bridegroom, a season of kingdom exploits together. Fully participate in the prophetic season these 7 days speak of. Receive all that is earmarked for you in this week. Soak in the sound release he is speaking over you, and prepare to let go of all that is past forever. The season of possessing the kingdom and your inheritance which has been stored up for you beyond the reach of change or decay, is ahead.